What's happening?
Weird.
That was really weird. Maybe there
Yeah.
was an interruption.
Turn the video back on again. Turn it off.
Huh.
Oh, I'm not sure. Hey, Jim.
Hello.
Oh, good timing. We're going by that one. Just kidding.
Okay.
So you're on, you're
Probably the more
good.
What a few days.
Yeah, the agenda and then the staff report for board goals.
Paul and Peter. Is John a member of the public?
Yes,
Mhm.
he's with, says John Q from KEPW 97.3 Whole Community News.
Does he wish to speak?
We haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't called the meeting to order yet, but we're due now according to the screens, so.
Well, since you were all suited up
No,
for it,
you're
do you
good,
want to
you're
go?
good. I'll hand
All right.
back to you.
Hey, Ben, nice to see you. All right, well, let's call to order. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 5. Is that a quorum? I think we're.
Yeah.
I think we're good. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep.
Okay, can everyone hear us? All right.
Great.
So we're calling to order. The agenda is pretty much around strategic goals aside from our ordinary things, so that makes things simple. Is there anybody from the public who wants to speak?
John, if you would like to participate in public comment, you can unmute yourself and then say what anything you'd like to say. If not, then we can move on.
Hi, this is John Quetzalcoatl Murray. I'm attending his media, so I'll just be listening today. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome. All right, so moving on then, we have the board meeting overview. So the board met on July 11th. Paul was approved for another term on the committee. Was that the same meeting that we removed Misty?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't mark that down. So also Misty Frost had been out of communication for several meetings. So by our bylaws, she's off the rolls now. But we wish her well. Maybe we'll hear from her at some point. There's talk about the budget. There was some the budget was exceeded for the fiscal year, but there's some monies expected to come in. There were several reasons for it. I don't know if we want to go into those details.
Yeah, I can just share out. So for this fiscal year or ending our fiscal year that ended June 30th, the board discussion was around looking at our finance sheet. We shared with the board that we're going to each meeting have the fiscal status update be its own agenda item as opposed to the consent calendar. So that way we will be specifically spending time to review that information with the board. And what we shared out was giving a little bit of a year-end review, at least for the last month. The June report has not yet been shown to the board because we delay that by 1 month. But in the May finance report, it did show that we were over budget a little bit. I think that will probably be the case as we conclude the fiscal year. But also part of the discussion you're referring to, though, was sharing with the board that we have more reserves coming in that haven't yet been accounted for because those are due to arrive in June, which the next time the board meets in September, they will see that financial report.
Okay, thank you. There's some fee increases that and the board asked for a staff report. So there's an annual increase for asbestos and ACDPs. And there's some discussion among the board about soliciting permittee input. changing fees requires rule change, but they seemed like they would consider that if they felt motivated.
The
Say
take
that
home,
well.
yeah, the take home I got from the board discussion was, there's an interest in the board having more of an opportunity to potentially change our fee structure if there was a real strong desire. So going into next year, ahead of our annual by rule fee increase, we will indicate to, we'll create agenda item a few months prior to that fee increase for the board to be aware that the annual fee increase was taking place, an opportunity for the board to discuss it, as well as making it clear to our permit holders through like our email distribution program saying, hey, the board at this meeting date in time will be discussing the annual fee increases that are expected to take place with the changing of the fiscal year in July. And so it's the opportunity for the sources, or anybody, it's not necessarily sources, asbestos fees are part of that too, to come to a board meeting and participate in the public participation component of it and say anything they might have to say to the board about that topic. So that will be that was a take home that I got from that board meeting, will be a change on how we move forward next year.
Okay. The sale of Airmetrics is wrapping up. Ben, are you familiar with that? It may not have come up in time. Yeah. So that was what was it called? An
Enterprise fund. So in the same way that like the city has an enterprise fund, which is a for-profit entity, like the airport, for example, the airport exists to make money, but it also provides services to all of us who live in Eugene and the region. But they are existing to make profit. And so the city owns it. So Arapa had an enterprise fund called Airmetrics where they made air samplers. The board in December of 2022 voted to close that enterprise fund. And so the share out to the board at our recent board meeting was that basically the last to do in that process that the board set up for us has been done.
So, yeah, it was a good thing at the time when it started and for a lot of years, and it's just sort of technology has moved on. Anyway. So the building remodel, that process is moving along. So the bid was awarded to a contractor. Arapa's made arrangements for temporary space at Lane County, and work is going to start in a few weeks, right?
Yeah, we have all of the contracts signed with Proper Built, who is the general contractor doing our remodel. We are moving into Lane County Public Service Building in their basement. They have a corner of the basement that's not being used. And as a very kind gesture to Arapa, they're allowing us to move that space and utilize it at a pretty affordable rate. And we will be there for the duration of it. We're moving next Thursday, so following next Thursday, we will no longer be physically located here. We will be at the Public Service Building. We have a mailing address, so any of our permitted sources or anybody who wants to send us something, it's a Eugene mailbox, the company Eugene mailbox, which is located off of Willamette Street. They accept UPS and FedEx deliveries because we receive a number of those. So that will be where we collect mail for this duration. And the expectation and the hope is that it'll be 6 months and no greater that we are out. So February 2025 will be a move back into our offices here.
The Lane County buildings are off of Delta? Is it up in that area?
No, Lane County Public Service Buildings, downtown Eugene.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. And do you anticipate that there's going to be room for meetings there? Or?
Oh, actually, that's a really good question. Our CAC meetings the board is choosing to take virtual meetings over this period. I think the CAC could consider what they would like to do. I don't think we will have the space to really that's conducive for us to meet in that way. If the CAC would like to meet virtually, we could do that approach. If another approach is we could reserve a communal space, such as like at the Springfield City Hall or another location, and then we could all go over there and set up there. So I kind of looked at the CAC on what would be some good preferred approaches in that.
Maybe we'll bring that up during round table.
Okay.
Well, it happens that Proper Built's doing a project for me right now, so I'm afraid yours can't start.
Well, I hope that they're quick to.
Don't be so quick to
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that covers it unless there's something you think of.
No, I think that was kind of all of the major talking points from the board meeting, I think you hit on.
Okay. Well, any questions from anybody on any of that? All right, well, let's take a look at this staff report on the goals. Right, yes. So we've had this topic for, I don't know, a couple months now.
So if I can maybe provide an introduction here that could help our discussion. So this is the proposed staff report that we plan to provide to the board of directors at their September board meeting that reflects CAC feedback and insight into your all preference or feedback or indications that you would like to give to the board. So this will be something for them to look over and digest. I also in September will be providing them with some draft goals as well that incorporates feedback received from you all here. But this staff report is more of a outline of what the CAC wants the board to reflect upon when it comes to the goals. So they'll have this to see. They'll also have some draft goals that I will propose to them. And I imagine the board will have some feedback on those draft proposed goals. And then I will take that, make some changes based on the feedback received. And ideally in October, maybe November at the latest, that will be some goals the board will adopt and be the new goals.
So if we have any suggested tweaks, would that go into the
Yes.
staff report?
This staff
That
report.
timing's okay for
Yep.
that.
Mhm.
All right. I don't know, the best approach, should we just walk through the whole thing? We've got lots of time allocated for this.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
do you guys online have access to it?
I can pull it up. Oh,
I think Heather, if you want to share it on the screen, because folks like John won't have access. I mean, it's on our website and
That's
posted
okay.
there, but we can share it here.
Well, I would suggest we just skip over the issue statement and background information and go right to the input and recommendations. So number one, existing goals, Oak Ridge, West for quality improvement. So things that have been submitted were to modify and expand this goal. Possibly expanding to other communities. And the rationale is that the original goal's been achieved, that it's now an attainment or. Any comments? Could have been moving on.
Well, I guess I will comment on one thing is that I felt like after our last meeting, we had actually had some more detail. And it's definitely not reflected in here, so we're not looking to resubmit that stuff, right? It's gonna be encompassed. Because, you know, it talked about like some of the things that worked in
Mhm.
Oak Ridge and applying that.
The wood
But it's
scope.
just not specific, yeah, none of the specifics, because even just reading through this in general, I noticed that a lot of the comments that we had proposed are not in here.
We were trying to be concise and trying to summarize some of those ideas. So if, I guess then a feedback point for this would be, you know, on existing goals, recommendations here, to elaborate a little bit more than what you're thinking that it currently does, which in this case sounds like the concept of expanding the efforts such as wood stove changeouts and ductless heat pump installs to communities beyond just the Oak Ridge
Yeah, because there were a
area.
couple of specifics,
Mhm.
really, otherwise it's not applicable, right? Because of
Right.
what the goal was. So in this one, you might want a couple of specifics, right, that were. Okay.
Well, and, you know, to expand on that a little bit, so. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but you're thinking other areas like, I don't know, Vida, Blue River.
That's what was
places like
mentioned in the
that.
past is that, yeah,
Maybe
given,
coast.
yeah, the success of that program, that if there were opportunity, knowing that it was like a quantitative reduction that was
Mhm.
visible, that it was, might be worth looking into those specific things.
I'm sure there's a lot of wood stove use in other communities.
So specifically list those communities, because it does say expand to other communities.
No,
I wasn't thinking of listening to communities. I was just thinking that having a couple, like when you say expand programs, what is that? What, you're right, what were the
Well,
successes?
So the wood
of-
stove and the,
Yeah,
Just a-
I think the feedback as I'm hearing it could be or described as successful air quality improvement programs in the Oak Ridge Westford area to expand those efforts beyond Oak Ridge. And I would say that like the reason why those efforts occur in Oak Ridge is because they had a non-attainment issue. They weren't meeting the air quality standards. There's no other and they're now currently are in maintenance for those standards, so they're meeting them. And there's no other community or airshed, I should say, in Lane County that is not meeting the standards. And so then it becomes well, where from El Rapids perspective do we see this need to be the greatest? And from our monitoring, I mean, Oak Ridge continuing those efforts, of course, is needed. There are places like in West Eugene area where our monitoring has demonstrated an impact from wood stoves, presumably during winter months, during air stagnation episodes and things like that. So this goal more focused on homewood heating interventions, expanding those to other communities.
okay,
yeah, well, and point well taken as far as West Eugene. Just kind of think about testing. We know about West Eugene, but are there similar issues in other communities that we don't have specific testing data for? That's an unknown.
Yeah, it's hard to describe what the particular, like Vida was mentioned, Blue River area. There's no regulatory grade air monitoring up in the Blue River Vida area. Expanding our monitoring network is something that can be done, but there's a lot of challenges that go along with that, particularly the cost of setting up those monitors and then running them.
Topography and meteorology are different too, so it may not be an issue at all. I just wonder if the Purple Air Network would give any,
Insight.
fill in a few holes.
That is a useful component of those air sensors is they don't give you data that you can stand on from a meeting national ambient air quality standards perspective, but they can give you some insight as to where perhaps some additional regulatory grade monitoring could be started or done.
I mean, would that kind of information be enough to work on a grant from?
I mean, if you in any grant application, you just have to justify it. And if you are using Purple Air data to justify the need and the grantors, depending on who they are, consider that to be adequate, that's really kind of up to them. My viewpoint is that Purple Air data is better than no data. So.
Okay, well, that's just kind of where my head was at. So don't need to get lost in the weeds. Anybody else? Feel free to weigh in at any time. So I guess moving on, B is internal efficiency enhancement. Maintain with specific focuses. So that's moving on from that page.
Yeah.
proposed additions were to specify filing system updates, review policies and procedures, consider staff needs. Yeah, it's all sort of necessarily outline form, but any input?
I guess my question is, it doesn't really seem like the draft that is it's not a draft to go to the board because it's just showing like. We're saying proposed additions, but what are you guys actually gonna like, are you gonna update this as for review prior? Because this doesn't really seem like the draft that would go to the board since it has proposed and recommendation.
Well, this is what the board would be seeing from the viewpoint or the perspective of CAC on the current goals.
Okay.
And so of the current goals that exist, that was set in 2022, here are these specific goals that still exist. Does the goal stay? Does the goal need to be modified? Does the goal need to be removed? And then we have proposed new goals, which are here are some new ideas or some new suggestions that can be added.
I guess what I was expecting is after we made this, that you guys as like would kind of have some of what you said you were working on. Because because you talked about that you had a filing system that you guys were working on and then like.
Incorporating the current.
Because we don't know what the specifics are. We're just so I don't know if there was something that you guys had in mind that was gonna take that to like the next. Anyways, no big
Yeah,
deal,
we're
but
kinda seconding the concept anyway.
Yeah.
Without knowing the details.
because some of this is like ongoing and some of it, you guys had some specific stuff and we said that would might be nice to have. But we don't know what that is.
Right, well.
To propose it, I guess.
Yeah, so the filing system updates, reviewing our policies, procedures, are items where I'm driving an effort where we are effectively going to be abandoning our current file structure and approach and are in the middle of crafting a new file structure and approach in an effort to increase our efficiencies, to make it easier to find historical data, as opposed to living in the prior administrations or past administrations organizational structure that I would qualify or describe as not helpful.
So I would just change it to say establish new file structure as opposed to specify filing, like the proposal would be, and then we were saying consider staff needs to you guys of like, do any of like the internal, policies and procedures for staff need to be looked at, I guess is.
I see.
So
establish new filing systems.
that would be the proposed goal, I would think, associated with efficiency enhancement, yeah. And then I don't know if you guys have any, reviewing policies and procedures is always a good idea. I guess when I was thinking of staff needs, it's just you guys have had quite a bit of turnover. So are there any specific things with the efficiency that would be helpful, I know as far as like the employee handbook updates or anything like that, that would be a good thing to look at. But
Yeah. Well, and
in other words, I would just take this out because that was us kind of advising.
You can take it out.
But
Well, I think that for me, I've been clear with the board that I would like us to have a different filing structure than what we currently have. And if there's agreement from the CAC to say, sure, yeah, we think a better new filing process or system would be an agreeable goal for us to work on. I'm appreciative of that perspective for sure.
I think that would be a little bit more clear than specify filing. Yeah.
Do we have consensus on that? All right.
Okay.
Ready to move on?
Mhm.
C is pre-budget planning, financial stability assessment, and funding source diversification. So recommendation is merge into one comprehensive financial strategy goal. Rationale creates more cohesive approach to financial planning and stability.
So this is one where I believe that there was, as I'm recalling, one of the other goals. This was a merging this with a secondary goal. And I'm trying to recall what that goal was.
Well, I guess that's what's confusing me is I guess I would have expected because there were 3 categories, all with similar type stuff. So I was just saying like one heading and then list the goals that were duplicate. under here. So the recommendation, rather than saying merge, would actually just show the merge, because I can't remember what they are now.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I can pull up the minutes from the last meeting.
I don't know if there was that much in the minutes. It was more the things we sent in
Yeah.
since the meeting.
I can go print them.
I don't know.
I guess I would just say that maybe reconsider how it's presented, because a lot of the information is missing now by saying,
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
I hear what you're
So,
saying.
Yeah. Well, I understand the need to be not too specific, but yeah, it feels like some of the meat is missing.
Do you want more of a verbatim scenario where I can just type verbatim what you all
I don't even
said
know about
versus
that.
summarizing it, or?
I guess what I was expecting to see is like a budget heading, and then you take the three different ones that had overlap and listing the goal of the budget stuff under that, is what I was expecting to see. But however you think the board would like to see it.
Well, I think what's useful, or what I'm trying to have us have here, is something that the board can see and read that is really just kind of like 1 to 2 pages. Because if the packet for the board becomes lengthy, I start to wonder how much of it is time to put stuff together that's not being reviewed. So looking for some conciseness is helpful. But my objective is to have something that the CAC is like, we feel this is a representation of our feedback to the board on what those changes to the goals would be. And so what modifications to this that we need to do that would accomplish that is what I'm hoping to be able to come.
I don't think that they
Well,
would be able to approve that though without knowing what they're merging,
Well, so
since the meat's gone. You know what I mean? The
Yeah.
content is gone. So and this is, because it is true that we would recommend merging these, but I don't know that they're gonna be like, okay, without actually seeing what they're merging.
Mhm.
So I think they're gonna have to reference
Are
the
they-
current goals while they're reviewing this, wouldn't they?
Are they gonna be working off the old goals in
Well,
conjunction with this?
so what I will be doing, so I've been meeting with the board members one-on-one over the last couple weeks. Yesterday was my last one where I met with Mike Fleck. So I've had time with each board member. And my approach has been, from their perspective, what are the things that ORAPA should be working on from a goal-oriented approach? And so I will take that feedback that I've received, and I'm going to craft new goals
Okay.
that they will be reviewing. And what I think is the feedback from the CAC on the current goals that I'm also, I've been a part of these meetings. I have my notes here on what those changes ought to be. And that will be fed into the proposed goals that I bring to the board in September. And so this document isn't necessarily it kind of is here's the goals and here's what we have to say about each particular goal.
Yeah.
But it's more for the board to get a sense of, here is the CAC's perspective on the current goals. And so as an example, one of the goals here is the website redesign. So the recommendation is just to remove it because the goal has been achieved. And so that is essentially the CAC saying, yeah, we don't think this is needed any longer. And in my proposed goals, there won't be a website redesign goal. So it's more of a expression of perspective and opinion on what the board what the CAC wants the board to understand. So of things that are going to continue to exist in the goals, is there will still be an effort on Oak Ridge, West Fir. Sounds like from the CAC that something that would be real additive to that, though, is what avenues or what approaches can ORAPA consider to try to expand some of those homewood heating improvement interventions beyond just the Oak Ridge, West Fir airshed. On internal efficiency and enhancement, the CAC recommendation is, we're hearing from the organization that the current filing structure is not as efficient as it could be. And we agree that focusing on the internal filing structure to make it more efficient is a worthwhile effort. On the pre-budget and planning, stability assessment, funding source diversification these really are a singular approach on I'm sort of drawing blanks here on the feedback on that one. But this document is a reflection of the current goals as have been and what the CAC thinks ought to be similar, different, or new about them that will go alongside or be a support of these proposals.
So that's the component that was missing, is that there's going to be a draft of proposed goals that goes with this. I guess that's all I was looking for. I was like, this isn't very clear, it's not very explanatory, but if it's just an accompaniment to new proposed goals, then it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I should have set that context from the start.
Well, with that understood, I mean, some of these are easier to grasp, like the website redesign, just remove it. That's a good example, but some of them, it feels like we need just a little more.
So then on the pre-budget
there.
planning, financial stability, what could be additive there to have that hit home a little bit better?
Yeah, that's maybe the worst of the examples, but
That one was just redundant because it was literally said the same thing in different words.
yeah, I think that was the main
Was the main-
recommendation there, is just combine everything under
Yeah, they're saying that
Budget
basically the
planning.
exact same thing in two different ways, like look for new opportunities for funding, and then it was said explore different funding or something. So it was like, but under two different categories, I think was really all it was
Yeah.
about.
I don't think, other than that, we didn't have a lot of.
So some of in the current
Supervision.
goals, there was some redundant recommendations or language on sourcing funding, establishing funding, seeking new grants. kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is, I mean, part of that is, so there's nuance here in the sense that like, so for me, when I say, you know, we have multiple revenue sources at Arapa, some of them is from our partners, which that is one source. So that's affirming the relationship to make sure that our partner fees are still coming in. Another revenue source for us is we have from our permitting fees. And then we have another source of revenue that is from our grants. And most of our grants are pass-through dollars where we don't get to use them to necessarily pay for general staff time in way of supporting the general fund. So I think that's where some of those redundancy kind of ideas came from, is because of the different avenues of funding that we have.
Well, it's kind of a tough balance to have enough detail in there to make the goal understandable and useful without being so specific that you're not open to new ideas or other approaches.
So we can modify this one, C, with generally the modification will be to have a more focused approach to budget process and funding.
Sure, that sounds good to me.
So instead of the word cohesive, just change it to focused, or
Well,
or we'll just wordsmith it later.
Yeah, we're kind of.
I don't even know if it's necessary in this, knowing that it's going to be presented elsewhere.
Yeah,
Now that I know what the intent of this is, I don't think this needs to be modified necessarily. Up to you guys.
well,
So-
yeah, and I don't want to pick it apart. I just feel like a little more detail might make it clearer where we were coming from.
Yeah, remove redundant.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
do we want to go on to website redesigns? Easy. Should we go on to community engagement? So maintain and enhance with specific objectives, set outreach targets, focus on public education, engage with less involved communities.
Peter's.
Oh, great. Peter?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here to combine E and F that could be stated as something like community outreach, education, and partnerships. And then I think the objective statements, which aren't shown here, but the objective statements could be combined as well, which would be increased interaction with communities to raise air quality awareness and strengthen relationships with local communities and industry for problem solving. I think that would help with the conciseness of the overall document, and you wouldn't lose anything in the process.
I like it.
Mhm.
So say that again for me, Peter, so I can make sure I'm understanding you fully.
Yeah, combine E and F, and it could be relabeled community outreach, education, and partnerships. And then the objective statements could be combined as well. And those aren't shown here, but they're in your May 28th.
Okay.
So actually, the recommendation under F is to merge. That's listed here.
To merge E and F. Yeah.
I definitely noticed that industry was left out of almost this entire document, which was a little disappointing because that was one thing that I thought was pretty important.
Yeah, like the focus on public education. Was that the piece we wanted to include industry specific?
Well, there was, as I understood the feedback being like, community engagement is important and that is engaging of community members, but that also can be engagement of the regulated source in terms of like, hey, air regulation's complicated and we can engage with you to help you understand some of the inherent complication of the Clean Air Act and Clean Air Oregon and all of those.
It definitely strengthens relationships of people.
Yeah.
I would say on all sides of industry, because like one of the biggest things that I noticed on the regulatory side is people don't half the time didn't know that they were doing anything wrong because it's all very complicated legalese. And so like that outreach of just being like a resource and helping with this stuff goes a long way to helping with those relationships. So yeah,
and I think of all the goal suggestions, that was one of the more specific thoughts that I'd like to see a little more crystallized in this.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yep, I follow.
All right.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Okay, G is air metrics. That's an easy one. That one out the window. Complaint intake process. This might have been my thought, was just wondering about record keeping with complaints, if it could be improved. I know there's some frequent flyers who complain almost weekly, and I wondered about how that may skew the complaint database, and is there a way to account for that?
So a reflection on the complaint policy in terms of how many tally checks, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't know if it just, you'd still want to know about those, even if it's a frequent complainer. I'm not saying discount that. I'm saying, is there a way to get a more nuanced view of that data? Rather than just and you tell me, you maybe already do this.
We are, a change was made when Steve Dietrich was here back in 2021, I want to say, where our approach in the past was every complaint that we would receive was another like check, so to speak. But then a change was updated to where if it's a single individual or property really complaining about a different event or property or issue or source, be it industry source or otherwise, that air quality complaint was kind of one per day, essentially, as opposed to if there was 4 complaints submitted in a day. In the past, that would be 4 unique complaints, as where after the change, that would be a singular complaint. But then the next day, then that would be another like check, type thing. And I think the intent there was to try to divide or to separate out specific or perceived events, such as an example of if someone is doing an outdoor burn and they have a burn that's taking place and someone complains, and then if they complain in the afternoon after complaining in the morning, it's still the same burn that one person is conducting. And is that 2 separate complaints, or is that still the same singular issue? But then the next day, if the person then starts a new burn and then there's a complaint, then that is a different or a new source of emissions. Because
How does that work with
different-
industry that's doing it every day?
Well, it's kind of the same thing, or is if there is a industry source is engaging in a certain process that's creating an odor or an event or an issue.
It would be treated
Presumably,
the same.
that work is taking place over this day, and then the next day, presumably, that it's the same process, but it's a different process
Gotcha.
type thing.
Yeah, I don't know, it's hard to get the proper nuance.
It's
I
almost
think-
like you have a complainant and then the number of occurrences versus the number of complaints. Because if you have the same person who just every day is gonna call because they hate the dust from the orchard, it's gonna happen every day. It's gonna be a complaint every
Yeah.
day versus like one complaint and how many occurrences happen.
But
I don't know.
how do you separate that?
I don't know.
from Somebody who's complaining just because they're adjacent to the pollution.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
And I,
Somebody who just doesn't like, because there's a difference between being out of compliance complaint and then somebody who just doesn't like it.
well,
But-
we accept complaints regardless of whether it's
Right.
within our jurisdiction or not. It's more of a representation of
Okay.
you as a person are indicating that there is this impact on your air quality and you're wanting to let us know. So therefore, we will write it down and we will document it, even if it's something that's outside of our scope
Okay.
or authority. So like agricultural burning.
You still record it.
We will still record that complaint,
Okay.
even though it is not within our scope to intervene or to address that circumstance, because that's trying to capture what are the things that are driving impacts, or what are the things that are notable to those in Lane County from things that are affecting their air quality, regardless of whether or not it is within.
You guys have a way to query that then?
Mhm. Yeah.
So you could differentiate?
okay, I guess what I would like to know when I see the complaint data is total complaints. But I'd also like to see a subset of repeat complaints from the same, about the same source or from the same complainer. But I'd also like to know about, say, that time when Baxter made a mistake and they had VOCs going through the neighborhood and many people complained about the same incident. In my mind, that's another category altogether where it was a major event. And it's good to know how many people complained about that one event.
Oh, gotcha. What is it?
So what I'm thinking of could be exploring, and this, the word I'm going to use might not be the right word, but it's a diversity ratio in the sense of, hypothetically speaking, we have 10 complaints on this industry source. What is the diversity ratio of those 10 complaints? If that diversity ratio is 1, then that would indicate that all 10 of those complaints are from the single same person or persons,
Oh, gotcha.
or, you know, whatever.
Yep.
But if that had a diversity, you know, of 2 or something like that, diversity ratio, then that would indicate that there are 2 unique complainants in this
Mhm.
circumstance. So
Yeah, that's kind of getting at my thoughts.
so if in a, you know, you're reviewing a month, and because in our director's report, we do put, here's how many complaints we have, and then we do list the sources that those complaints were on, be it industry, be it outdoor burning, or whatever the case may be. So if it was an industry source, then saying of these 3 complaints, how many of them are unique complaints from one another in terms of like the person submitting the complaint versus how many are the same complaint? Is that kind of the insight that?
Yeah, that's kind of.
Like 3 complaints in this month and 3 from the same person is, or?
Yeah,
3
and so that
different
would
people?
be a, I don't know what the term would be, that I think the
Yeah, I'm
diversity is
sure
kind of the
there is one.
awkward word to use there, but that would be like 1, you know,
Yeah.
because it would be
Right.
indicating that it's from the same complainant.
Yeah, it would be
Oh,
interesting.
Paul,
Yeah, what you were saying, Travis, about a diversity score was interesting. Is there perhaps some way to correlate, complaints that are made and how often are they substantiated? Like, for instance, how often is it resolved with official, resolution from LRAPA? The idea being to try and filter out spurious complaints.
So our complaint response is when we receive a complaint, we will investigate it and then will resolve it. And the way we resolve it is we indicate sort of what the assessment was. And there is a confirmed, which is like, yes, we know that this was the thing that was taking place. We absolutely can confirm it. There's a suspected where we can't quite objectively say that, yes, this source was the cause of this complaint. But we strongly believe that it is. Then we have unconfirmed, which is where we actually are not sure what this complaint, what the source of this complaint is. And then there's an other. So those are really the three categories. And the way we interpret it is if it is confirmed or suspected, then that's seen as yeah, we think that this source is the cause of this complaint. And the difference between confirmation and suspected is essentially whether or not we were kind of able to get out there and observe it and see it factually. As where if it's a complaint like someone saying, well, I'm noting this odor and this odor smells strongly of this particular, has this attribute to it. And we know that there is the source that part of their process is creates an odor that smells the same way. But we we can't objectively say that, yes, they had a process that created this complaint. So that would be a suspected in the sense that there's a source that creates these types of odors. The wind direction was blowing it towards the complainant. So we suspect that is the cause of this complaint. And so those two categories are essentially considered a positive response, I guess you could say. And then the other two is either other or unconfirmed.
Is that data presented when you have, because I feel like I've seen how many complaints, but I haven't seen that component.
No, I don't think that we actually publish that information, but that could be something to reflect upon.
So actually, time is getting on, but you get the gist of the thought there.
Yeah.
So I thought we could try and just quickly get through the rest of this, particularly the new proposed goals. The last one for possible modification was regulatory engagement, succession planning, and staff training. So that's just maintaining what we already have. New goals, education and outreach, trying to improve understanding of LRAPA's role in air quality regulations. I'll just go through these, and if there's any comments,
That one sounds
Feedback.
similar to the community engagement. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right.
Hmm.
It could probably go into that. And I think maybe
Well, I mean, this is, in my mind, it doesn't say industry here, but I think that this was kind of the industry, kind of getting to Kelly's point of involve industry more in your outreach and education on the rules, and regulations. I think that the additive to this is kind of where some of that can.
Although
Well, I
also the
think-
complaints was a big part of this is because people who call and say, well, you need to do this, but that's way outside your authority. Or you had mentioned, like, even during the permitting process, you can't just deny people this stuff. People in the community also don't really understand where your guys' authority lies. It was my recollection of kind of.
Yeah, well, I think where I was coming from on this was thinking back to some hot button public meetings where people were
Yeah.
expecting LRAPA to just say, nope. And it felt like perhaps if there was a way to educate people a little bit of these are the rules and this is what we are able to do, it would be helpful. But that is a tall order too. So I just sort of putting it out there of what can we do to improve that. All right, environmental justice and equity, which is always a little bit of a squishy thing in my mind. Pursue grants, provide bilingual communication. Wildfire smoke preparedness, enhancing community readiness, develop education programs, create resources for smoke exposure prevention, addressing industrial timber management practices. I don't remember what that was about. Consider expanding LRAPA's role in addressing wildfire smoke exposure, particularly for vulnerable populations.
Oh, a lot of that came from feedback we got from Teresa Rourke.
Okay.
On some of her perspective from Lane County Public Health on where LRAPA could be providing more of a effort and assistance
Yeah.
for those items.
I think where I landed in that whole thing was, and Paul has brought it up too before about prescribed burns as a long-term strategy for minimizing, but that is a tough one because Smokey the Bear has been such an effective ad campaign. It's hard to get people to think of that kind of thing as a potentially good thing. Collaborative land use planning. Whoop,
Be a good one to,
go ahead.
yeah, I think this would be a good one to add in, the fire smoke preparedness, and it could be combined with the previous discussion about monitoring new trends, emerging air quality challenges and opportunities in our region.
Yeah. Collaborative land use planning, work with local jurisdictions on zoning to prevent future air quality conflicts. That one, I think, was me too. I was thinking back to issue where local government land use planning decisions eventually lead to conflicts over air regulations. I'm thinking things like one of the coach manufacturers in Coburg sold some property. It got developed as a neighborhood residential area. And Coburg allowed all that to happen. And then the coach manufacturer found themselves with multiple complaints in a lawsuit. It was sort of short-sighted land use planning in my mind. And probably short-sightedness on their part themselves. But I think of other things like, who was it? Rexius, or must have been Rexius out in West Eugene. A hotel got built right next to them. They eventually got driven out. And the hotel people were encouraging their clients to call and complain to LRAPA. That's, to me, that wasn't LRAPA's fault. That was land use planning by City of Eugene to allow a nice hotel to get built next to a wood waste handling place. Is there something LRAPA could do to encourage more big picture thinking on those sorts of issues?
Yeah, I think that there is effort there in the sense that LRAPA would and the cities would benefit from a deeper working relationship, not only just in land use planning of putting industry right next to residential and some commercial types, but to Clean Air Oregon is a air toxics regulatory program. And if the city continues to zone, or in a circumstance where you have industry zoned right next to residential, because of Clean Air Oregon, the amount of emissions that that industry source will be able to essentially emit because of the proximity of the closest residential receptor, can severely limit the amount of industry activity that can take place.
That's a very good point.
Especially with urban reserves and the urban growth boundary continuously expanding into.
Yeah, or an industry could think they're set as far as Clean Air Oregon, and then a school gets put in, or a daycare or something. All of a sudden your category changes, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so the more cities can have an understanding of some of those regulatory nuances, I think the better off all of us are. So.
Okay, well, and then Clean Air Oregon was the last thing. I just wonder, that feels like over time that's going to get more and more important.
That is a good
I'm not
point.
sure people are thinking much about it. We are at a time, a little overtime, but okay, we felt like a rough start, but we got somewhere in the end. So you feeling good?
Yeah, so we'll make some changes here, providing a little bit more detail from what was had on these to bring before the board. And then two, I think Jim, since you'll be at the board meeting in September, the board, if there are questions on these items, I think we'll be able to look to you to provide any kind of clarification or correction on some of the discussion as they look through that.
Right. So for roundtable, we need to address future meetings with the office here not being available. Is the Springfield City Hall, is that free or?
We're lucky enough that the city of Springfield allows us to utilize that space at no cost, presuming that we give enough heads up to wanting to make use of the space.
Okay, well, typically more than half of us are by Zoom, and we're all used to it from a few years back. I would suggest that we just plan to meet remotely until the office is done.
February.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that, Paul? Go ahead, Paul.
You're on mute.
You're muted.
I've got something for roundtable when we come to it.
Okay, should we go ahead and plan on just remote meeting until the remodel's done? And that's 6 months?
6 months.
Okay, well, we're not meeting August anyway, if y'all recall that, and we won't meet December, so there's actually not that many remote
So
meetings. we
September,
have.
October, November, January, and then if we move in mid-February, the end of February, we should ideally be in our new space, all
Okay.
things going to
Yeah.
plan.
All right, well, let's hope for that. All right, Paul, go ahead with your roundtable topic.
So I heard a little chatter around the community that there was a recent incident where there was a excessive amount of methane emissions at the Short Mountain landfill, and consequently, EPUD ran their cogen plant for longer than usual, naturally, and they, cleaned up that emission effectively. However, that resulted in a fine from LRAPA. So, anyone can say anything. I'm just wondering if that chatter's true, because if so, it's kind of a blow to LRAPA's credibility.
Elaborate more again, Paul. I guess I'm not, can you describe again? I'm sorry.
Well, EPUD has that cogen plant at the Short Mountain landfill where they collect the methane emissions, run it through diesel engines. I think there's 4 of them, and generate electricity, and it effectively cleans up the methane emissions. Well, for some unknown reason, the methane emissions vary out of Short Mountain, and so there was a period of time recently where the methane emissions were extra high, so EPUD's cogen plant had to run for longer than usual. And this put them somehow out of compliance with their permit, probably for the diesel exhaust. And consequently, EPUD got fined for it. And, this is just talk I've heard around town, but I'm wondering if it's true, because if it is, it's kind of a blow to the credibility of LRAPA.
Well, I guess, Paul, I'm going to ask first, I'm kind of curious when you say talk around town, if you can elaborate a little bit more on where you're hearing that. And secondly, I would say that if LRAPA is ever issuing a notice of noncompliance or taking enforcement action, I don't know if that would be considered or should be considered a blow to LRAPA, as more a demonstration of us doing our job in reviewing permit conditions. And if we notice that there's noncompliance with the permit condition, then working with the source to bring them back into compliance. And so from under that context, from my perspective, I think that's an example of LRAPA doing exactly what we're here to do. So I'm just, Max also has his hand up, so I think he has more to add to this, but I'm curious, real quick though, Paul, when you say talk around town though, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Just some guy I met who said he works for EPUD.
Oh, okay. Max, do you have anything you want to offer?
Yeah, I'll just come on audio here, and I'm on my phone, so I'm not going to start my camera. But yeah, so the facility, Paul's right. EPUD had an exceedance of their plant site emission limits because of they didn't take into account the variability of the quality of the gas that they get from the collection system from the landfill. So it was really about the BTU rating that it varies, and they didn't take into account that they would be burning more gas over time as the gas quality varies. So it was kind of a part of a short-sightedness on their end, that they didn't anticipate that variability in the gas. And so we had them modify their Title V application to account for those higher PSELs. So they're actually having to ask for higher limits. And so we're going through that process. But thanks for
see.
bringing that up.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with that. Thank you, Max. And yeah, so again, Paul, I would say that that's just an example of when more data is learned and understood or reflected upon, acting accordingly and adjusting the permit conditions to appropriately reflect what's needed for environmental protection. And so I don't see that necessarily as something that would be a blow or egg on El Rapa's face, and instead an example of where we're making better actions and taking charge when we have newer, better data than what we had before.
Well, did they get fined for that?
Well, I would say, because this is something that's somewhat recent, and at this point, if we're in the middle of an enforcement process with it, which I'm not sure, I'd have to find out, where that process can be a long process and so far from complete. So at this point, I'd say that unsure. I'd have to look, but there wouldn't be any civil penalty assessed at this point because it takes time to get to that point, and a lot of conversations take place, and those conversations with the enforcement side of ORAP are ongoing.
Mm-hmm. To an ordinary member of the public, this could be seen as here, EPUD's doing something good. They're collecting emissions and processing them, and then some minor variability. And if it results in them getting fined, it would make an ordinary member of the public think, gee, maybe we shouldn't pay so much attention to El Rapa's regs when it comes to something that's real, like asbestos, for example.
Yeah, and I think that for any, kind of general member of the public, that certainly could be a perception that they could interpret. I don't necessarily know that everybody would interpret that. And that's an easy correction by just having a conversation with that in person and explaining what the real reality is to them, to correct that misunderstanding.
Okay, well, we're out of time. So unless somebody has something burning, we'll adjourn. Our next meeting is September 24th. So have a good rest of the summer.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye all.